There's something out there in the Pacific Northwest that even the military can't stop. In 2014, they tried to contain it again, this time with reinforced steel walls 3 feet thick, enough acid to fill an Olympic pool and an entire tactical response unit. But it didn't work. It never works. Because this thing doesn't just survive, it learns. And what happened to that small mining town of 400 people showed exactly what it had learned about hunting humans. In 2014, documentary filmmaker Isaiah Mark discovered something unusual while researching abandoned towns in the Pacific Northwest. A small mining community of 400 people had seemingly vanished overnight just 6 months earlier. The local news barely covered it. The state police had no answers. The town simply emptied, leaving behind fully furnished homes and running vehicles. What caught Isaiah's attention wasn't just the disappearance, but how the authorities cordoned off the entire area within hours of the first emergency calls. No press was allowed within 5 miles of the town. No aerial footage existed. The official story claimed a chemical leak, but Isaiah found no evidence of any chemical company operating in the region. 2 weeks later, Isaiah began interviewing people from neighboring towns. A truck driver who regularly passed through mentioned how the week before the incident, dozens of residents reported their pets going missing. Others spoke about hearing strange sounds at night, not animal calls, but something deeper, like metal being torn apart. The most compelling account came from Sarah Hayes, an old woman who lived 3 miles from the town. She described how on the night everything went silent, she saw military helicopters flying overhead. But what stayed with her wasn't the helicopters. It was what she heard on her ham radio. For almost an hour, her radio picked up the town's emergency frequency. The recording she gave Isaiah contained mostly static, but in one clear segment, a police officer was screaming about massive claw marks appearing in the concrete outside the station. The transmission cut off mid-sentence. Isaiah spent months trying to get permission to enter the town. Every official channel denied him. The military maintained a checkpoint on the only access road. But Isaiah found another way, an old mining trail that wound through the mountains, unused since the 1950s. He packed his camera gear, told his producer he'd found a lead on another story, and headed into the wilderness. The first sign something was wrong came when Isaiah found deep gouges in the rock face along the trail, each groove wide enough to fit his arm. They looked fresh. The pattern was unlike anything he'd seen in his 15 years of documentary work. As he photographed them, he noticed they all pointed toward the town. When Isaiah finally reached the overlook above the town, what he saw made no sense. The buildings were intact, but the streets were wrong. The concrete was torn up in long parallel lines, as if something massive had dragged itself through town. Cars sat abandoned, some crushed flat. A water tower lay crumpled on its side, not fallen over, but compressed like an empty soda can. Isaiah documented everything as he moved through the empty streets. The damage pattern was methodical. Whatever did this had moved building by building. He found half-eaten metal safes in the bank. The police station's reinforced walls had been peeled open. The school buses in the depot were scattered like toys, their metal frames warped and punctured. Inside the homes, Isaiah found signs of instant abandonment. Dinner tables still set, TVs still plugged in, family photos still hanging. But in the basement of every house, he found the same thing. Deep claw marks around the foundation walls, as if something had checked every underground space in town. The local library yielded the first real clue. Isaiah found a children's drawing pinned to the bulletin board, dated the day before the incident. It showed a massive reptilian shape behind the school. The librarian had written a note. "Tyler's 3rd drawing this week. Says he sees it watching from the trees." As the sun began to set, Isaiah decided to check one last location. The mining museum at the edge of town. The reinforced doors had been torn off. Inside, he found something different: careful destruction. Glass cases were methodically broken. Information plaques were crushed. The security footage backup system was specifically targeted. Whatever did this didn't want evidence left behind. In the basement archive, Isaiah discovered a partially destroyed document about a military transport crash in the mountains 30 years ago. The rest was unreadable, but one phrase stood out: specimen containment breach. That's when Isaiah heard it, a low rumble that made his camera equipment vibrate. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once. His first thought was earthquake, but the sound had a pattern. It was moving. Isaiah ran for the exit but stopped cold in the doorway. The street outside was different. New claw marks scored the concrete. The dust on a nearby car had been disturbed. As he turned to find another way out, his radio crackled to life. Through the static, he heard snippets of past transmissions, the police officer's last broadcast, garbled emergency calls, and then his own voice from the interviews he'd conducted. The last thing on Isaiah's camera footage shows the museum's security mirror. In it, a massive shape moves behind him, something that dwarfed the doorway, with scales that seem to adapt to the shadows. The camera falls. Heavy footsteps approach. 3 days later, a Foundation containment team traced SCP-682's path back to the town. They found Isaiah's camera, his notes, and a new set of claw marks leading into the mountains. The town was permanently evacuated, its access roads destroyed, listed officially as the site of an environmental disaster. The Foundation's report noted that SCP-682 had been learning, studying human settlements. The town wasn't random, it was practice. Today, satellite images show the town slowly being reclaimed by the forest. The only new visitors are Foundation patrols and the occasional lost hiker who never returns. But on clear nights, ham radio operators in the area sometimes pick up old transmissions bouncing off the mountains. Fragments of emergency calls, static fixed screams, and, underneath it all, a deep rumble that makes their equipment vibrate. If you enjoy these terrifying encounters, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't subscribed yet, so you won't miss the next eerie SCP tales. In the dense forests of northern Montana, they found what was left of Eric Dunn. His body was suspended 10 feet off the ground, impaled through multiple points by what looked like massive spider legs. The unusual part wasn't just how he died. It was what happened to the weapons they found scattered around his body. Every knife, every bullet, even the makeshift spears he'd apparently tried to use, they were all bent and broken in exactly the same way, as if something had learned the perfect method to counter each one. But that was just the beginning of what they discovered in those woods. This is the story of how 4 escaped convicts stumbled into the hunting grounds of something that should have never been allowed to exist. 3 days earlier, a maximum security prison transport careened off Highway 2 in northern Montana. The crash wasn't an accident. The transport's front tire had been shot out during a coordinated escape attempt. As the vehicle flipped and skidded across the asphalt, 4 high-risk inmates saw their opportunity. Ray Mercer, the mastermind behind the escape, had planned for this moment. He'd studied the route, memorized the terrain, identified the perfect stretch of road where backup would take longest to arrive. He led the group into the thick forest, away from the searchlights and sirens. Behind him came Leon Vasquez, Eric Dunn, and Marcus Turner. They pushed deep into unmapped territory, not knowing they were being watched from the moment they crossed the tree line. The first attack came at sunset. The group had stopped to rest when Marcus spotted movement in the canopy above. Something big, moving with unnatural speed. Before anyone could react, it dropped down and grabbed Eric. The massive arachnid creature tried to inject him with venom, but Eric's prison jacket was too thick. He managed to break free, and Ray opened fire with a stolen guard's pistol. The bullets penetrated the creature's body, forcing it to retreat into the darkness. They ran through the night, but the thing followed. When it attacked again, the bullets that had worked before just bounced off its newly armored body. It had adapted. Eric tried using a knife, managed to wound it, but the next time they saw it, its weak points were covered in thick plating. Each encounter revealed new horrors. It learned from every injury, every escape attempt. By the second day, they were exhausted and running low on ammunition. The creature had herded them away from any possible escape route, cutting off paths with massive webs that appeared seemingly out of nowhere. Marcus was the first to realize it was playing with them. Every time they found what looked like a way out, the thing would let them get just far enough to feel hope before attacking again. They lost Marcus at dusk. The creature had developed a new tactic, mimicking sounds to separate the group. It perfectly recreated the sound of approaching helicopters, causing Marcus to break away from the others. When they found him, he was partially cocooned, the creature's venom having evolved to penetrate clothing. His body was being systematically drained. Leon snapped after that. He tried to surrender, walking out into a clearing with his hands up, talking to the darkness. The creature dropped down behind him, its legs now tipped with barbs that could pierce the tactical vest Leon had stolen during their escape. They found pieces of him scattered across half a mile of forest. Eric lasted the longest after Ray. The former soldier's training helped them survive another full day, setting traps and attempting to outsmart the creature. But it learned from every failure. When fire drove it back, it developed heat-resistant plating. When they tried to crush it with fallen trees, it became more agile. Eric's last stand proved why they should have never tried to fight it. They found all his weapons bent and broken, showing how the creature had systematically negated every possible defense before finishing him. Ray made it the furthest. He'd seen enough to know he couldn't fight it, couldn't outsmart it. His military experience told him his only chance was to keep moving, find civilization. But after 4 days in the forest, he finally understood there was no escape. The creature had been guiding his path the entire time, manipulating his every decision, leading him deeper into its territory. They found Ray's body 3 weeks later, after reports of strange animal attacks brought investigators to the area. He was still clutching his journal, its final pages documenting how the creature had systematically broken down every survival technique he tried. The last entry simply read, "It doesn't just adapt its body, it adapts its hunting, it learns, it thinks, and now it knows how humans try to survive." The investigation that followed revealed that this section of forest had been restricted for a reason. 3 separate containment teams were lost trying to recapture the creature. Each time they got close, it displayed new adaptations, specifically designed to counter their tactics. The area is now under permanent quarantine, with satellite monitoring showing the creature's territory gradually expanding year by year. They say evolution is a slow process, taking generations to perfect new traits. But in those woods, something had learned to bypass those rules, and now it was loose, growing stronger with every encounter, learning from every prey it consumed. The 4 escaped convicts had unknowingly walked into its hunting grounds, and in doing so, had helped it become even more lethal. Their desperate attempts to survive had only made it better at killing. Today, if you look at satellite photos of that region, you'll see an expanding dead zone where nothing moves during the day, but at night, thermal imaging picks up something large moving through the canopy, something that gets bigger and more efficient with each passing month. The incident report ends with a simple warning. SCP-5683 is learning, and we taught it too well. It's terrifying to think that there are monsters who are very adaptable, which makes them unkillable. If you enjoy these stories, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't subscribed yet, so you won't miss the next terrifying SCP tales.